Is there anything coming from the road trip that does legitimately concern you? Or conversely, is there something that you thought, look, this looked horrible, but I've still got some faith in this?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly elements of it that are especially spooky, considering they had a very similar concerning road trip last year at the same time. That said, I think what they were tasked with this year was a kind of a different beast. I mean, not to fully make excuses, but three city road trips are tough enough when you add in a fourth with that stop in Williamsport, as awesome as that was. And, we could talk about that. Like, it's not like, I don't think any of the players are saying, oh, hey, can't believe we had to go to Williamsport. Like, that stands alone, but it does add to what was being kind of on their plate. And then you add in the fact that, your final stop there is a stop in Philadelphia against a very, very, very good Phillies team. And it was kind of the perfect storm to end on a sour note and extend a losing streak to where it's at right now.
Stacey asked me to start the show, like, what is your biggest concern? I said the ball throwers, the guys with the ball in their hand, the pitchers on the mound, trying to get this done. Just what are you seeing? I still think I'm optimistic. I still think that Kirby can figure it out. I think Logan has been a bit emotional this year, something I'm not used to seeing out of him. What's your optimism when it comes to just the rotation with Miller in it and then the bullpen? And then we're hearing Emerson might get a chance in the bullpen as well.
Yeah, I think you're on it in terms of what is the biggest concern. I obviously don't think that this series in Philadelphia was representative of their true talent level, but it was an example of, I mean, surely like the worst case scenario, but I do think it was at least indicative of some of the shortcomings when the starting pitching isn't perfect. Now, this is when they're,
actively getting crushed, so it's a little bit different, but even when they're less than perfect, again, you're just exposing the whole staff to overuse, to a lot more difficult decisions for Dan Wilson, some of which I know people vehemently disagree with, some of which you could say, well, what are his better options? There aren't really any great ways to turn. I kind of fall somewhere in between there, where there have been many situations this year where I wish there was a little bit more urgency because you now have an offense that can come back. And so it feels a little bit more frustrating to maybe use your lower leverage guys in games where you feel like you're back in it, but at the same time, you understand that you can't just throw Brash and Munoz every day. And even if you do, it's not always going to work out that easily. So these are all tough decisions, but it's also where the roster is at and where the inconsistency kind of leads you, especially when the starting pitching doesn't really set the tone.
How do you look at Houston's performance when it comes to trying to draw a silver lining for Seattle? Is it good news that Houston struggled, or is it bad news that Seattle didn't make up ground?
I think you still have to view it as good news. I think when we talked a week or two ago about the opportunity in front of them, even when the Mariners are playing well, it is about the fact that Houston is still flawed. And like I said then, and I will continue to say until they don't win the division, they still deserve to be the team to trust more to win the division than anyone else. But at the same time, you are seeing that this is still a roster that is short. This is still a roster that is missing some of its best players. This is still a roster that can get beat pretty comfortably, even by teams that aren't even necessarily that we think better than them or ahead of them in the standings. So I think that's kind of a reminder that, I guess the Mariners can be grateful that they didn't fall too much farther behind. But to your point, too, it was also an opportunity that they didn't take advantage of. Granted, again, facing Philadelphia in Philadelphia at the end of that road trip, my expectations were pretty low.
Yeah,
that was going to be my question is just how do you put some context to it? Philly is a good ball club, and they got some power there. Turner's playing out of his mind as of late. And sometimes when I look at matchups, I understand you're just outmanned. You're outnumbered. You can win a ball game, but you're outnumbered. How good is Philly? And give the Mariners fans some type of context and hope when it comes to the end of this road trip.
Yeah, it's also kind of getting back to Stacey's point about, okay, is it a missed opportunity? I know they kind of slipped away from them late, but there are also moments where it felt like the Mariners were absolutely right there and could have competed in some of these games. And so that's where it feels a little, it stinks a little bit more. But I mean, I'm all in on the Phillies this year. I picked them to win the World Series over the Astros, actually, when the season began. That's a prediction that has looked very good and very bad at times over the course of the year. And I'm not really sure how I feel about it right now, but Last year we saw the Phillies look like the best team in baseball for the first few months, fell off so hard in the second half, and then really flamed out in the postseason in memorable fashion. It seems like they're pretty intent this year, especially with some of the deadline moves to kind of keep that momentum, carry it all the way into October. I know some people think that momentum into October isn't real, and I understand that take, but I also think for the Phillies, they had been kind of so average for so long going into October last year that they were no longer threatening. This year, with the way they're playing, with how healthy they're getting, granted, losing Zach Wheeler is a massive deal, and that cannot, that is a huge deal. But you saw the other pitchers they still have. There's still a lot of parts of this team that are as good as any in baseball, and I think you saw that this week.
When you mentioned, I don't know how good I feel about that prediction now. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. My mind obviously immediately went to Houston, going, okay, the American League's a little more unpredictable. But then I thought, well, God, as amazing as the Phillies have looked, the Brewers have also been playing like the best team in baseball. Have you started questioning whether or not, first of all, are the Brewers doing what you thought they could do, or have they surprised you? And secondly, how much do you look at a team like Milwaukee that has surprised some people and say, God, maybe they should be, a World Series favorite in the National League?
Yeah, the Brewers are in a weird spot because obviously when you win 40 out of 50 games, it's hard to be like, nah, they're not actually that good.
I don't buy it.
But when you do compare them to Philly, it is a fun contrast because there's just so many fewer players that you know to be good, let alone trust in October, whether that is on the mound, whether that is, part of the offense. How are they going to score runs? How are they going to slug when it comes to October? And that's why I do still kind of default to Philly, even after what Milwaukee has done. And you've seen a little bit of Cubs punching back over the last couple of days, still well behind the Brewers because of how well they've been playing in the division. And I still expect Milwaukee to end up with the top 2 seed there. But ultimately, Milwaukee's in a spot where you really got to prove it in October. And that's taken on different forms, but they've been in the playoffs 6 out of the last 7 years, and they haven't made it to the World Series, right? Only made it to the CS once. So this team, I think there's a lot of reasons to believe it could be different. It could be special. It could be better. It could take down some of these more established teams. I love what I'm seeing. It's certainly an easy team to root for, but even though the Phillies have sort of backslid in the postseason each of the last 2 years after being in the World Series, that's still a group that I think I trust more that time of year than a group like Milwaukee.
How good is Julio playing right now?
This is starting to look pretty good. When you're seeing him, that home run yesterday was certainly something to behold, a reminder of his offensive ability. And honestly, that was kind of a refreshing homer because what has unfortunately been his undoing is chasing, right? Is swinging outside of the zone. That's a pitch that was clearly outside of the zone. He still found a way to do damage. I think that was pretty cool to see. And just, again, you see these flashes, these moments where it's like, oh, right, he's one of the most talented players on the planet. And so he's obviously been a huge part of it. You like to see him get going. Really nice to see Gino kind of putting some bigger swings on this week. I think that can kind of help balance out the offense, especially as Naylor has maybe been dealing with some injuries and cooled off. Obviously, Cal still kind of going through it outside of a few homers here and there. So you can't complain about what Julio's been doing lately, and I expect it to continue.
I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about what you think are some theories for differences in starting pitching. But first, I want to talk about what differences we're actually seeing. We kept it very simple, and we're talking about ERA to start the show. Starters are 16th this year. They were first, I should say, in 2024. They were not as good on the road. So I think that's a factor that, in my experience from earlier in the show, at least one listener was saying, look, this wasn't a pitching group that was great on the road last year. I think what we're seeing is they're mostly the same, just maybe not as lucky. But I don't know that it feels that way to me. And I know that, so they're 25th ERA on the road this year versus 19th in 2024. But to me, that drop from first last year for starters to 16th is so much more than just bad luck or injury. Like, there's a real thing there. I just don't know what it is.
Oh, 100%. And honestly, I think, when you're talking about numbers like that, you've just had some really bad outings, right? It's not just that, they're allowing 3 or 4 each and every time out, and that kind of adds up to an average ERA. You've had some serious clunkers that have kind of tanked the overall numbers, and that's just been the nature for literally all. I guess obviously Castillo and Wu have been there, but we know Castillo's been inconsistent. But for Miller, Gilbert, and Kirby,
The injuries have impacted all three of them. There have been moments with all three of them where they have looked good, although Miller, for the most part, has not really at any point looked anything close to what he was last season. And it adds up because those are the guys that are making the starts, and so you just don't have the same kind of consistency. I think what we saw before this road trip appeared to be Gilbert and Kirby starting to round into the form that resembled more like 2024. But as we saw, this was clearly a step back this week. So is that ceiling still in there? Yes, but I mean, you have to say what is most interesting is if the Mariners are able to qualify for the postseason and if they are lucky enough to line up their rotation, what does that look like? What is the trust factor right now for these pitchers, and who would you line up? Is it as simple as giving Brian Wu the ball in game one because he has been by far the most consistent pitcher, not just on this team, but in the entire league? Or do you default to the guys that you assume have the higher ceiling, like basically any of these other guys? I think Miller at this point is more of a wild card, but I'm really curious about that as the season goes on.
Is it time to just throw away the matchup situation when it comes to the lineups? We have some Texers who are for it. We have some who are against it. Me personally, I'm just to the point where I say throw your best bats out there. I don't care what the matchups look like. Where do you stand when it comes to this team in that situation?
Yeah, and this is obviously an equation that is going to be impacted by this bizarre, disappointing Victor Robles situation. And I don't even know. I mean, it's truly one of the stranger and more difficult roster conundrums I can really remember covering this sport is this Robles thing and this potential suspension and wanting to bring him back because you think he can make a spark, but also realizing that you would have to play a man down if you activate him and all these things. But to your point, the guys that are there right now, I hear you. I think, Cole Young has earned those everyday at-bats, I think, at this point. I think Canzone, you could say the same thing. You don't want to totally lose track of a Luke Raley because you feel like there is serious upside in there. Obviously, with Solano and Moore, we know where that has really gone this season. So I'm mostly on your side there, but clearly that there's still some level of appetite for mixing and matching to some degree.
I know that part of it is favoring handedness and matchups, and I get that. But Dylan Moore has been kind of a controversial. He's very well liked, but has really, really, really struggled. So he obviously was a fan favorite. People really liked him, but I think people are really, really frustrated with what he's doing. I've just assumed that his defensive flexibility keeps him there. Is that something that, in your opinion, managers should be more willing to sacrifice? Because at the plate, there's nothing.
I mean, I think yes, but not in the scenario that they are maybe about to face with Robles, because if you are playing a man down, you probably do need to maximize the versatility, both from a pinch running and, defensive substitution. And as bad as he's been with the bat, Dylan Moore still is giving you that more than, Solano. So I don't know, but I think it's a fair question to ask. It is kind of a tragic way for Dylan Moore's Mariners tenure to end, whether it does happen here in the next couple weeks or at the end of the season. Dude's the longest tenured player on the team. It's an unbelievable thing to consider when you realize that he had never played in the major leagues before they signed him to a major league contract, and he's been able to carve out this role with moments of offensive brilliance and Gold Glove last year. So, I hope we don't lose sight of what Dylan Moore has been able to be for this team, but I also completely understand the frustration from fans who just do not want to see him hit ever again. I get it because the stakes just feel too high.
Well said, though. Last one. It's very easy before we let you go. Tell us what you got coming out this week, where listeners can find more from you.
Yeah, so Baseball Barbacast, of course, continues Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you want more Brewers stuff, we just had a fantastic interview with their broadcaster, Brian Anderson, who's one of the best in the business, not just with the Brewers, but, basketball, baseball, postseason. He's fantastic. So shout out to BA on that. I got a piece coming out about Shane Bieber, who's making his return to the Toronto rotation on Friday. So you can look out for that later today, actually, at Yahoo Sports.
He is Yahoo Sports Jordan Shusterman. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, guys.